just give me a second to go back to where I was. Okay. Just one moment. There we are. Okay, so good. Okay, back to Yoma and back to share. Okay, share screen and Yoma. Okay, so Tona Rabbanim, Arbaim Shana. So Shimon HaTzadik was for 40 years the high priest, and all the 40 years as a high priest, the Jews were on a high level. After he died, and the Ptolemies took over from Alexander, the Hellenization of the Jewish community began. They began to go downhill, which culminated in Hanukkah, which is also a civil war. But with all the 40 years that Shimon HaTzadik was the high priest, the lot for the goat that was sacrificed to Hashem always came up in his right hand. From then afterwards, sometimes it came up in the right, and sometimes it came up in the left. The sign that God's favor was not so much with the Jewish people. And the tongue of crimson wool would become white. So what happened was there was a skein, like a bundle of red yarn, and half of that bundle they wrapped around the string was wrapped around the horns of the goat that went to Azazel, and half of that string was hung from the doorway of the Heichal, the doorway that went into the Beis Hamikdash proper, so it could be seen from the courtyard. And miraculously, when the goat was pushed off, if the Jewish people had been atoned for, if the Jewish people were worthy, the red wool was miraculously turned to white at the moment the goat was pushed off the cliff. So during his 40 years, the red string always became white. From there on, sometimes it became white, sometimes it didn't become white, which means after Shimon HaTzadik, the record of the high priest was mixed, especially after many of them became Sadducees, like in the time of the Hasmonean dynasty, the later kings. Another interesting point is that this was the original litmus test as to whether the Jewish people had truly been atoned for or not. Anyways, another thing that happened during the life of Shimon HaTzadik, those 40 years, they were, the Jews were politically vassals of the Persians and Alexander's successors, but they were spiritually in a good place. And the western lamp would burn all night. From there all morning. Sometimes it burned, sometimes it didn't burn. In other words, the western lamp is depending on how the menorah was oriented. Was either the lamp, if the menorah was, so just picture in your mind, the Heichal, the temple building itself was a rectangle, and 2/3 of that rectangle was the Kodesh, the holy. In the holy was the menorah. So the question is, was the menorah arranged from east to west, in other words, longitudinally, or was it arranged left to north to south, in other words, with the wide part of the menorah perpendicular to the long part of the Heichal? Should I draw a picture? You guys getting it? Should I draw a picture?
Yeah.
Let's see if I can get a whiteboard up. Hold on. Yeah, okay, so my pictures are bad, so bear with me. Let's see, I'm gonna draw. Oh, good, I can draw a box. Okay, so this is the Heichal. It was a rectangle, and now I'm gonna draw a line, and it was divided 2/3. So where my cursor is now. Is the holy. Can you see it? Is the Holy of Holies. This was the holy. The menorah was in the middle. So the question is, were the menorah's lamps arranged like this? Was the menorah arranged this way, or was the menorah arranged the other way? In other words, like this. You see? So the western light, the Holy of Holies is on the west. The wall, the western wall, is the outer wall closest to the Holy of Holies. So the Holy of Holies on the west. So the western light would be the seventh light this way. But if the menorah was arranged this way, the western light was the middle one, that its lip and the wick was turned towards the Holy of Holies. In other words, according to the opinion that the menorah was arranged this way, perpendicular, all the lamps were arranged so the wicks were facing inward, and one wick faced westward. That's the western light. So going back to the Gemara, whatever the western light was, it burnt until, so the menorah was lit in the afternoon at mincha time, and it burnt all night. It had enough oil in it to burn all night. But the western lamp during the time of Shimon HaTzadik miraculously burnt until it was time to light the menorah again in the afternoon, and they would just add oil. So at the time of Shimon HaTzadik, the western light was a sign of Hashem's divine presence resting over the Jewish people. It burnt all night and all day, miraculously. The other ones went out by the morning, but this one went out. And furthermore, another supernatural sign of God's favor, the fire of the altar remained going strongly. In other words, they didn't have to keep adding wood. It was a supernatural fire, except for the 2 pieces of wood that they brought every day so as to fulfill the mitzvah of putting wood on the fire that we read about in today's Torah portion that we're learning now. But after he died, sometimes the fire burnt all night, and sometimes the fire didn't burn all night, and it needed more wood. Now, I want to talk about this because this is something that we discussed in the sermon. The purpose of the Beit last week, the purpose of the Beit HaMikdash was to bring the purpose of the temple, the purpose of the Beit HaMikdash was that we be able to experience Hashem's presence, the divine presence in the physical world. However, it only works if we're righteous and if we have the right intentions in mind. And that's the case over here, that in the time of Shimon HaTzadik, the people were worthy of seeing the divine presence, which is expressed in the suspension of numerous rules of nature. In other words, there was a different nature in the temple. And in the temple, when things were as they should be, there were many things going on that demonstrated the presence of the divine, the presence of a different reality, literally as if heaven had come down to earth. That's the theme of this whole thing. And in addition, and there was a blessing sent upon the offering of the Omer and the 2 loaves that were brought on Pesach and the showbread. And what was the blessing? There were many priests, so everyone only got a tiny bit of bread, a little piece. And nevertheless, even if you got only a little piece, the Kohanim ate it and were satisfied. Okay. Now we're going to move on. Now, Shimon HaTzadik knew the year, Tanaraban, we learned to the Brisa, Osa Shana Shemait Ba Shimon HaTzadik. The year when Shimon HaTzadik died, Amalem, he told his fellow Kohanim, B'Shana Zu Meis, after he came out of the Holy of Holies in Yom Kippur, he says, this year I'm going to pass away. Amalem said, how do you know this? Amalem, he said that every Yom Kippur, every Yom Kippur I had a vision. Okay, it wasn't an actual prayer. I had a vision of an old man wearing white garments and wrapped up in a white talus. And he entered with me and left with me. Vayom, an angelic being. Vayom Nizdaman Lizak, and I had a vision of an old man wearing a black garments and wrapped in a black talus. He entered with me to the Holy of Holies, but he didn't come out. After Sukkot, he was ill for 7 days, but and he passed away. Now, once he passed away, the people felt that they were no longer worthy to do certain things. So his brothers, the Kohanim, stopped blessing the Jewish people with the name. Every day in the Beit HaMikdash, several times, they did the Berchat Kohanim that we do on Yom Tov, they do in Israel and in Israel every day. So they used to say the Berchat Kohanim with God's explicit name, the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey pronounced. But after he died, they stopped doing the Berchat Kohanim with Hashem's name. They did use it on Yom Kippur. Now we're going to talk about the 40 years, the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. There were many signs that the Jewish people should straighten out before the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. Toda Rabbanim, we learned in the Bright, Abayim Shana, and the idea of these signs is that because the temple was the place where God's presence was revealed, so when the Jewish people were not as they should be, the temple showed it to them. This was the gift of the temple, that you knew where you were with God, but they didn't listen. So 40 years before the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, so starting about the year 28 of the Common Era, Lo HaYagorel Ola B'Yamin. The Gorel for Hashem, the goat sacrificed in the temple, never came up in the right hand. Lo Yelashon Shel Zahoris Malbin, and the red string never became white. Lo Yaner Maravi Dolik, and the western light never burned all day. Sorry. And the doors of the sanctuary would open themselves instead of the very heavy doors, gold-plated, huge, heavy doors. And every morning they would open by themselves as if to let the enemies in. Until Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who, as you know, is the one who ultimately saved Yavna, he yelled at the doors, Heichel, Heichel, why are you frightening yourself? I know that you're going to be destroyed. And Zechariah already said this, open the white one, because the Heichal was white, your doors, and let fire consume your timbers, because the Heichal was supported by large cedar timbers. In other words, Zechariah ben Iddo, already in the book of Zechariah was the last prophet, literary prophet, him and Malachi. And they prophesied in the times of the Second Temple, and they already prophesied the destruction of the Second Temple. And he says, I know already, because Yochanan ben Zakkai, as we know, tried very hard to stop the Jews from fighting with each other. But as we know, in the end of the Second Temple, there was terrible factionalism, and the Jews were fighting with each other terribly. And he knew that this would bring the destruction of the temple. So he says, stop frightening everyone. I know you're going to be destroyed if we don't straighten out. There is in the centrist, what's the name of the centrist party in Israel, Joe? Yossel. Oh, he went away anyways. Okay. So there's a very frum woman, a very religious woman who's in this new party that has since disintegrated. And in her first speech, she talked about she mentioned this Gemara, and she talked about a lot of the dissension that exists between Jews and Israel today, and said basically it's a bad sign. Okay, so why is the temple called Levanon? This we'll conclude with. The Malbin of Neseni Shel Yisrael, because it whitens the Jewish people's sins, because when things were as they should be, the goat Azazel completed the full atonement of the Jewish people. So at any rate, What we gather from today's study is that the purpose of the Beit HaMikdash was to be a palpable, visible expression of God's presence among the Jewish people and how the Jewish people are doing with God, what their status is. Okay, and that's of course what we're missing is this ability, as if it were, to be aware of God's presence in a palpable way, expressed in a physical way. Okay. Okay. Now, with that, I wish everyone a good day. And again, because the email said 12:45, we'll meet again at 12:45, Mitzvah Shem.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Now, we're in Parshat Tzav. Just be aware that our reception 12:45 may not be so good because I'm going to be at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst koshering, and I'm just finishing that. I have a kosher kitchen that I have to kosher. So if I'm on the road, the reception might be a bit off, but we'll do our best to have the class. Okay, have a great day, everyone. Thank you all for coming, and see you soon, Mitzvah Shem.